If you'd told me a month ago that I'd end up spending Saturday mornings picking up trash at the city park with a guy who'd just stolen my phone, I'd have laughed in your face. But here we are. And honestly, it's been kind of weirdly great. So, yeah, I'm doing community service. First time ever. Not because I'm some criminal mastermind. No, I'm just a dumbass who thought it was okay to sneak into a club after they'd said no and then got caught. The judge gave me a choice. Pay a hefty fine or volunteer 40 hours cleaning up public spaces. Being broke and stubborn, I picked the latter. The first day I showed up, I was trying to blend in, looking like I had a plan, but also hoping no one made me talk. These community service gigs aren't exactly social hotspots. Usually it's a bunch of strangers looking at their shoes and counting down the minutes until they can leave. But then, there was this guy, his name's Jamie. I noticed him immediately because he didn't look like he wanted to be there either, but in a different way. He was more intense, like he was constantly sizing up the world around him. Tall, lean, with this messy mop of dark hair and these sharp green eyes that somehow made picking up trash look interesting. Yeah, I know. Trash isn't exactly closenessy. But there was something about how he moved, quick but deliberate, that made me want to strike up a conversation, even though I never actually do that kind of thing with strangers. Turns out, Jamie was also doing community service for the first time. His story was way more complicated than mine. Something with a reckless night in a car, but he didn't want to get into it. We started off mostly avoiding each other, but after a while, we ended up paired for the day, which meant no hiding behind earbuds or pretending to be busy on our phones. There we were, two guys who'd just been sentenced to clean up other people's messes, bonding over trash bags and the occasional sarcastic comment about how this is definitely not what either of us pictured for a Saturday morning. It was awkward and easy and weird all at once. The park itself was surprisingly nice, if you ignored the cigarette butts, crumpled soda cans, and the occasional suspiciously sticky wrapper. We joked about how if we were going to get stuck doing community service, at least the weather was on our side. The sun was out, enough to be warm but not so hot that we melted into the grass. What I didn't expect was how, by the end of the morning, I looked forward to the next time we'd have to meet up. Maybe it was because Jamie made the time less boring. Maybe it was because, for once, I wasn't just pretending everything was fine or trying to be invisible. Or maybe it was because, against all odds, I was starting to like talking to this guy who I'd never thought I'd cross paths with, much less share a trash picker with. So yeah, if you'd told me I'd spend my community service actually wanting to show up, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am, counting down the hours until I get to see Jamie again, and wondering what the hell just happened. The next Saturday, I showed up at the park a little early, mostly because I wanted to make sure I caught Jamie before he wandered off or got stuck with some other group. I was standing near the entrance, pretending to check my phone but really just scanning for him. When he finally showed up, there was this half smirk on his face like he was amused by my borderline creepy eagerness. "Early bird, huh?" he teased as he tossed his trash bag to the ground. "Figured someone's gotta keep you in check," I said, trying to sound casual but definitely failing. Jamie laughed, this genuine sound that made me realize how little I knew about him. "You're weird," he said, but it didn't feel like an insult. More like a challenge. We set off into the park, picking up whatever rubbish we could find. The rhythm was easy. Bend down, grab, toss, repeat. But the silence between us was comfortable. Not the awkward kind, but the kind where you don't feel pressured to fill every pause with nonsense. We talked a little about the music we liked, the dumb stuff that got us into trouble, and somehow it didn't feel like small talk. It felt like real talk. At one point, I caught Jamie staring at me. Not in a creepy way, but like he was trying to figure something out. It made me nervous, honestly, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Something on your mind?" I asked. He shrugged, eyes flicking away. "Just, you don't seem like someone who'd get into this kind of mess." I snorted. "Yeah, well, neat and tidy isn't really my thing. You?" "Same," he said, voice low. Guess we both had a bad night. That was the first time he admitted it wasn't just some random screw-up. There was weight there, something I didn't push because maybe he wasn't ready, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was either. After a while, we found ourselves near one of those little picnic areas, benches worn down by years of use. Jamie dropped his bag and sat down, patting the spot next to him. "Take a break," he said. I hesitated but sat anyway, feeling the sun warm on my skin and the quiet of the park stretching out like a bubble around us. "I never thought community service could be this tolerable," I said, laughing softly. "Yeah, me neither," Jamie agreed. Then he looked over at me, eyes serious. I was kind of dreading this whole thing. Thought it would be a total nightmare." "Me too," I said. "But now, he said, "I actually don't mind showing up. At least you're here." That hit me harder than I expected. There was something in his voice, a softness I hadn't heard before, that made my chest tighten. We sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, watching people walk by with their dogs or kids, completely unaware of the two guys picking up their mess. Eventually, Jamie stood up and stretched. "Ready to finish this?" "Yeah," I said, feeling a weird reluctance to get back to the trash bags. As we worked our way to the far side of the park, I noticed Jamie slowing down, glancing over his shoulder at me more often. When we got to a cluster of trees, he stopped and pointed to a small, scraggly bush. "Want to see something?" he asked. Curious, I followed him over. Jamie crouched down and pulled something out from under the leaves. It was this tiny, battered notebook, the cover torn and dirty. "Found this here last week," he said. "Thought it was some kid's diary or something." I flipped it open, and inside were scribbles, messy handwriting, some doodles, a few dates circled. It looked personal, like a secret someone didn't want the world to see. "Think we should try to find the owner?" I asked. Jamie looked at me, his eyes bright. "Yeah, I don't know, maybe. Feels like the right thing to do." For a moment, I felt like this was more than just some community service chore. It was like we were part of something bigger, or at least something that mattered beyond the trash. That day ended with us sitting on a bench, trying to decipher the notebook, trading stories about our own screwed-up lives, and for the first time, it didn't feel like we were just trying to fill time until this was over. On the way out, Jamie nudged me with his shoulder. "You coming back next week?" I grinned. "Wouldn't miss it." As I walked home, I kept thinking about him, about the way his laugh sounded, the way he looked when he thought no one was paying attention. I didn't know where this was going, or if it was even supposed to go anywhere, but I knew one thing. Community service had never been this interesting before, and neither had Jamie. When Saturday rolled around again, I found myself actually looking forward to heading back to the park. I know, community service sounds like the last place anyone's excited to be, but with Jamie around, it felt different. Like maybe this was turning into something I didn't hate. Or maybe I was just desperate for human contact that wasn't awkward as hell. Jamie was already there when I showed up, leaning against a tree with that same half smile he always had. He waved me over like we were old friends meeting up for coffee, not two guys stuck doing trash duty. "You ready to go on a trash hunt?" he joked, tossing me a pair of gloves. I caught them and smiled, always. We started working through the usual spots, but this time, Jamie was quieter at first, like he was lost in thought. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. "Hey, you okay? You've been kinda MIA today." He glanced at me, then shrugged. "Just thinking about stuff." "Stuff like what?" I asked, curious despite myself. Jamie sighed and leaned his weight on the trash picker. "You know how I said I wrecked a car? It wasn't just some dumb accident. I was driving with my ex. Well, my ex now, and we were fighting. Real messy. I wasn't paying attention, and bam, ended up crashing into a fence. No one hurt, but it was enough to get me community service and a whole lot of guilt." I nodded slowly, trying not to say something dumb like, "That please mess," because, well, it did, but it was more than that. It sounded like his whole world got a little messed up that night. "That's rough," I said finally, "but at least you're here now." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second I forgot where we were. Two guys in gloves, picking up trash. It was like there was this quiet understanding between us, something unspoken but real. "I guess I'm lucky this gig brought me someone who doesn't judge," Jamie said, a little smile creeping in. "Hey, no judgment from me," I said. "I'm more of an expert in screwing up than anyone I know." He laughed. and that sound felt like the best thing in the world right then. As the morning went on, our conversation drifted from serious stuff to dumb jokes about the weirdest things we found in the park. Jamie found an old, crusty sandwich and declared it Mystery Meat Deluxe. I told him about the time I accidentally locked myself out of my apartment in nothing but my boxers. He groaned but laughed anyway. There was a rhythm to it all, this mix of getting to know each other and just being comfortable in silence. I realized I was starting to look forward to these moments more than I expected. Around midday, as we were wrapping up, Jamie suddenly stopped and pulled out his phone. "Hey, you want to grab some food?" "My treat," he said, eyes hopeful. I blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. Sure. We walked to a nearby cafe, still in our grimy community service clothes, and Jamie kept stealing glances at me like he was nervous, or maybe just unsure of himself. Over burgers and fries, the conversation turned more personal. Jamie talked about his family, the pressure to be perfect, and how everything fell apart when he came out. It was raw and real, the kind of stuff I hadn't expected to hear on trash duty. I shared my own story, how I'd always been the good kid until I made that dumb mistake with the club. Talking like this, without pretending or hiding, was new for both of us. It felt like peeling back layers, slowly but honestly. After we finished eating, Jamie looked at me seriously. "I'm glad we met," he said quietly. "I didn't think community service would be something to look forward to, but here we are." "Yeah," I said, feeling something warm spread through my chest. "Me too." We walked back to the park together, the silence between us comfortable and full of possibilities. Before we parted ways, Jamie hesitated, then reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. "See you next week?" he asked. "Definitely," I said, smiling. As I watched him walk away, I realized that this community service sentence might have been the worst thing to happen to me, and the best, because somewhere between the trash bags and awkward conversations, I'd found someone unexpected, someone who got it, someone I actually wanted to see again. And honestly, I can't wait to find out where this goes. I wasn't sure how I ended up here, looking forward to community service, texting Jamie after hours, and actually hoping he'd reply. It felt strange, like my life had taken a left turn somewhere between picking up candy wrappers and stolen moments while cleaning up other people's messes. It was Tuesday when I finally got a text from him. Just a simple, "Hey, you free this weekend?" But it sent a weird jolt through me. I stared at the screen for a good minute, wondering if I should play it cool or just jump at the chance. I didn't play it cool. "Yeah, definitely. What's the plan?" I replied. His answer came faster than I expected. "Meet at the park?" I thought maybe instead of trash bags, we could just hang out. No community service uniforms, just us. I grinned like an idiot. "Sounds good to me." Saturday came, and instead of meeting in those grimy gloves and faded vests, Jamie was wearing a simple black tee and jeans, his hair looking messier in a good way. I was wearing my favorite hoodie, the one I usually reserve for lazy days or when I want to disappear into my own bubble. But today, it felt like I wanted to show up for him. We met near the same picnic area where we'd first cracked open that battered notebook. Jamie smiled when he saw me, this genuine, easy smile that made my heart do things it shouldn't. "So," he said, looking around like we were kids sneaking into a secret fort, "no trash, no rules, just us. Now that's my kind of community service," I joked. We wandered through the park, taking our time. It was weird how normal it felt, like this was the kind of thing I'd always wanted but never knew how to ask for. Jamie talked about his love for photography, something I'd never heard before, and showed me some pictures he'd taken on his phone. The way he saw things, through his lens, made the park look like a completely different world. I told him about my college days, how I used to be the guy who planned everything, only to fall apart when things went sideways. He didn't laugh or judge. He just listened, really listened, and that alone made me feel less alone in the mess I'd made of my life. At some point, we found ourselves sitting on that same bench, the one with the rough wood and peeling paint. Jamie pulled his jacket tighter around him. The sun was dipping, and the air was getting chilly. "You ever think about what happens after this?" "After community service? I mean," he said, his voice low. Honestly, I said, I thought I'd just go back to pretending everything's okay. But now, I don't know. Maybe there's more to figure out. He nodded slowly. Me too. I'm tired of messes I can't clean. There was a pause, a quiet moment where everything felt charged. I caught the way his eyes searched mine, like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how. Hey, I said, reaching out to bump his shoulder gently. We're both figuring it out. Maybe that's enough for now. Jamie smiled, this soft, grateful thing that made me want to stay in that moment forever. We walked back toward the park entrance, side by side, the world around us fading into background noise. When we got there, neither of us moved to say goodbye. Finally, Jamie looked at me, his gaze steady. Can I be honest? Always. He took a deep breath. I didn't just look forward to community service because of the work. I looked forward to seeing you. My heart was pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it. Same here, I admitted. I wasn't expecting this at all. Without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. It was warm, a little clammy, but exactly what I wanted. Jamie squeezed back, his smile breaking into something real and bright. Maybe this community service thing isn't so bad after all, he said. I laughed softly. Yeah, maybe it's the best sentence I've ever gotten. We stayed there for a while, just holding hands, neither of us wanting to pull away. I don't know what the future holds, or if this will last beyond the last bag of trash, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe I'm starting something worth keeping. Something messy, complicated, but real. And honestly, I can't wait to see where it goes. After that day at the park, things didn't magically turn into some perfect romance. It wasn't like in the movies where everything clicks and the world suddenly makes sense. No, it was more like this slow, awkward dance, where neither of us really knew the steps but somehow managed not to step on each other's toes. And honestly, that was kind of perfect. We kept texting, sometimes all day, sometimes just a quick, hey, how's your day? And every message felt like a thread pulling me out of the usual mess in my head. Jamie had this way of making the ordinary feel less heavy, like I wasn't carrying the weight of my screw-ups alone anymore. One evening, a few days after our official no-trash hangout, Jamie texted me out of the blue. "Want to come over? I'm making way too much pasta, and no one should be alone with a big pot of sauce." I laughed, picturing him in his tiny apartment, probably juggling a pan and his phone like a pro. I said yes, and by that weekend, I found myself standing outside his door, a little nervous but mostly excited. This was new territory, hanging out somewhere other than a park or a court-mandated cleanup zone. Jamie opened the door with that same shy smile, and his apartment looked like a chaotic mix of photography gear, books, and half-finished projects. It felt cozy, real, like the kind of place someone lived in, not just slept in. "Come in," he said, motioning me inside. We settled in the kitchen, and I helped him chop vegetables while he stirred the sauce. Cooking with Jamie was surprisingly fun. He was more laid back than I expected, teasing me when I oversalted the sauce or nearly knocked over the cutting board. So I asked, trying to keep the conversation casual, "What made you pick photography?" Jamie stopped chopping and looked at me, his eyes thoughtful. "I guess it's a way to make sense of things. Like, you focus on a moment, freeze it, and suddenly it doesn't feel so chaotic. Plus, it's kind of nice to look at the world through someone else's eyes." I nodded, feeling like I was starting to understand him a little better. I get that. Sometimes I wish I could just pause everything and figure out who I'm supposed to be. Jamie smiled softly. Maybe we're both just figuring it out, one messy step at a time. We ate pasta on the couch, leaning into each other like we'd known each other longer than a few weeks. The TV was on, but neither of us really paid attention. When Jamie's hand brushed mine, I didn't pull away. Instead, I turned toward him, and suddenly all the nervous energy between us melted away. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I grinned. "I was hoping you'd ask." That kiss was clumsy and perfect, like everything we'd been holding back finally found its way out. Warm, messy, and real. Over the next few weeks, we kept falling into this rhythm, balancing community service, personal chaos, and the tentative start of something we didn't quite know how to name yet. There were awkward moments, like when Jamie's phone would buzz with messages from his ex, or when I caught myself wondering if I was moving too fast. But mostly, there was this quiet comfort in knowing someone was there, figuring it out with me. One afternoon, after a long day of cleaning up the park, Jamie and I sat under a big old oak tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. "You know," Jamie said, kicking at the dirt, "I never thought community service would lead me here." "Yeah," I agreed. "Me neither." He looked at me, a little nervous. "Do you think we could try this? See where it goes?" I smiled, feeling more sure than I had in a long time. "I'd like that." Jamie grinned, and for once, the future felt less scary and more like something to look forward to. No matter what happens after these 40 hours of trash bags and awkward conversations, I know one thing: we found something worth keeping. And that's more than I ever expected when I showed up that first day, just trying to get through my sentence. Maybe messes aren't so bad when you have someone to clean them up with. The more time I spent with Jamie, the clearer it became that neither of us had a clue what we were doing. Not with community service, not with life, and definitely not with this thing between us. But somehow, that uncertainty made everything feel more real. Less like a script we were trying to follow, and more like writing our own story, messy and all. One Saturday, a few weeks before we were supposed to finish our hours, the park was unusually quiet. The sun was shining bright, and the air had that fresh smell of early spring, crisp and promising. Jamie and I were working on a stretch near the playground, picking up stray bottles and wrappers. It was the kind of day where everything feels like it could change, even if you don't know how yet. As we worked side by side, Jamie suddenly stopped and looked over at me, this strange mix of hesitation and something deeper in his eyes. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot," I replied, wiping sweat off my forehead. He took a breath, his usual confident facade slipping just a bit. "What happens after community service? Like, after all this is done? What do we do with us?" I blinked. The question caught me off guard, but not because I wasn't thinking about it. I'd been turning it over in my head for weeks, trying to figure out if this connection was real or just some temporary thing born out of shared punishment. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "But I don't want to lose this. Whatever it is, you..." Jamie smiled, this small, vulnerable smile that made my chest tighten. "Me neither." We stood there for a moment, the sounds of distant laughter from kids playing blending with the rustling leaves. Then, without saying more, Jamie reached out and took my hand. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, and I squeezed his fingers gently, like I was promising him something without words. Later that day, we decided to skip the rest of the cleanup and just sit on a bench, watching the world go by. A few people passed by, throwing us curious glances, but for once, I didn't care what anyone thought. Sitting next to Jamie, hand in hand, felt like the only thing that mattered. We talked about everything and nothing, our hopes, our fears, the dumb mistakes we'd both made that landed us here. Jamie was surprisingly open, telling me about his family and how hard it had been to come out, how community service felt like a second chance he didn't want to screw up. I told him about my own guilt, the way I'd been beating myself up since that night at the club, and how meeting him made me feel like maybe I wasn't destined to mess everything up. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the park, Jamie leaned his head on my shoulder. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of moment you want to freeze and keep forever. "Hey," he whispered, "what if we try to make this real? Not just some community service fling." I turned to look at him, surprised but so ready for the idea. "I'd like that. Scary, but yeah, I'm in." He smiled, and that smile was like a promise. A few weeks later, we wrapped up our community service. No more gloves, no more trash bags, just two guys who somehow found each other in the middle of a mess neither of us expected. We celebrated that last day with pizza, sitting on the floor of Jamie's apartment, laughing about how neither of us wanted to go back to normal life. It was messy and imperfect, but it was ours. Looking back, I never thought community service would lead me here, to someone who understands the chaos, someone who's willing to stick around even when things get tough, Maybe life doesn't come with clean starts or easy answers. Maybe the best we can do is find someone to hold on to while we figure it out. And for me, that someone is Jamie. Months had passed since our last day of community service, but Jamie and I kept showing up for each other, for the slow and awkward dance of figuring out what we wanted beyond the trash bags and court orders. It wasn't always easy. Life still threw curveballs, and sometimes old doubts crept in. But we were learning to be less afraid of the mess. One evening, we sat on Jamie's small balcony, watching the city lights flicker on as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cool, but neither of us moved inside. It was like the quiet between us held more meaning than any words could. Jamie reached for my hand, the familiar warmth settling my nerves. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we got stuck doing community service." I laughed softly. "Yeah, me too." "It's funny how something that started as a punishment can turn into this." He turned to me, eyes soft. "You've made all the difference, you know? I don't think I'd be here, really here, without you." My chest tightened, the words sinking in. "Same. You helped me stop running and start facing things I'd been avoiding for years." We sat like that for a while, just holding hands and letting the night settle around us. It wasn't some grand declaration or perfect moment. It was simply two people who'd found something real in a place neither of us expected. Before long, Jamie smiled that crooked smile I'd come to love. "So, what now?" I shrugged, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. "I don't know exactly, but I do know I want to keep figuring it out with you." He squeezed my hand. "Me too." And that felt like enough. Our story didn't end with fireworks or a big dramatic goodbye to the past. It ended with quiet hope, with two imperfect people choosing each other every day, messy and real. Sometimes, the best kind of love isn't about grand gestures. It's about finding someone who makes the everyday feel a little less lonely. For Jamie and me, that started with community service and led to something neither of us saw coming. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing.